Welcome to our latest edition of Ranking the Albums here on Rock Show Critique. Today we have not just one, but two guests, Mr. Davey Cretin and Sir Thom Jennings.
Sir, I love it. I'll accept the moniker.
Well,
Sir, with love.
You were getting me to say it last time, trying to get me to say it every time I said it. So I said, well, I'll actually say it.
Maybe I'll have to just start talking with an English accent. We are reviewing an English band today, so we could be very haughty, you know.
All right. So today we decided to dig into a band we'd never touched before, and that is none other than Supertramp. The only catch is we decided just to rank the Roger Hodgson era albums. So that would be the first album up until the last one with him, which is Famous Last Words. It came out in 1982, the year of Asia. All right. So we're going to just do the traditional back and forth. We're going to start off with the number 7 for each, and we'll keep the format that we usually do is whoever, Thom Jennings and myself. So Davey, you're whoever today. So go right ahead and give us your number 7 there.
Okay, coming in at number 7 from 1971, their second album, Indelibly Stamped. And it's the one with the very racy album cover for 1971. It had the topless tattooed lady on it. And this album actually peaked at number 158 on the Billboard charts here in America. It was their first charting album. In fact, it was their first album released in America. Their second album, but their debut was never released here until after they had a big hit in the late 70s. On this album, it's mainly Rick Davies singing most of the lead vocals. So that's probably the reason it comes in as my least favorite. I guess I'm more of a Roger Hodgson guy. In fact, my favorite songs from this album, Indelibly Stamped, are the 3 Roger Hodgson songs, Traveled, Rosie Had Everything Planned, and Aries. And the song Aries, with the flutes, with their old band members, it just reminds me a lot of Traffic. On their first 2 albums before the classic lineup formed, it seemed that they were listening to some King Crimson and definitely a lot of Traffic. So I hear some psychedelic noodling and just some blues rock stuff. And it's good. It's okay, but I don't think it's an essential album. So that's my number 7, 1971, their second album, Indelibly Stamped.
It's to me, huh?
Yes.
Well, I didn't know that about the debut not being released in America. That's an interesting factoid. And speaking of that debut album, which came out in August of 1970, the first one, how do you pronounce that word? Eponymous?
Yes.
Okay, because I heard somebody else use the term on another video thing. Do you guys watch other people's rankings before we do ours? Because I do.
No.
Not before we do ours, but I do watch other things in between, you know.
Yeah, the guy said something like, the way he pronounced it was like eponymous or something, but it was really weird. And I'm like, have I been pronouncing it wrong all of these years? Is it Supertramp? No, it is Supertramp. But the first one, and back to the subject at hand, this of the 7 albums, I think this was the most difficult to get through for me. It sort of reminded me of the very first Genesis album. It sounds of its time. It doesn't really, speaking of Roger Hodgson's vocals, he doesn't even sound like Roger Hodgson. He sounds like, the way they mixed him and just the way even the way they mixed the album was weird. Some of the vocal effects that they used were a bit odd. It just seemed to be very, very artsy. And I will say, as an overall statement with regard to, listening to this whole catalog, I guess I had forgotten, because I'm so accustomed to maybe, listening to Paris or Breakfast in America, which tend to be my go-to albums. I'm surprised at how prog they were. They really, you know what I mean? I've always thought of them as more of a pop album or pop group than a prog group. But boy, they could get very artsy and very very proggy. And I think this is one where, I don't know, maybe they were just kind of finding their way and trying to figure out what they wanted to be. But it was, I just didn't really enjoy this record.
Fair enough. All right, so my number 7 is the same as Davey's.
Oh
Indelibly
boy,
stamped.
getting ganged up again.
Well, not really, but indelibly stamped is just, I mean, you figure with a cover like that, you figured that would have sold some copies in itself, but it just yeah, this album is just I listened to it like 8 times through, just trying to find something that I would have liked. And the only, I don't know, even the Roger Hodgson songs I really couldn't really, enjoy as much. But this was the last album that Roger actually played bass on during his tenure with Supertramp. That's what he plays on along, with some little bit of guitars, but he played bass on here as well on a track or two. It also says that this album holds a distinction as there's only one song in the entire Supertramp catalog for which Rick Davies does not receive no writing or co-writing credit, and that would be Rosie Had Everything Planned, the Hodgson Frank Farrell written song, Shorty at 2:58. But even, I don't know, I just couldn't really get into this album whatsoever. And Tom, you're absolutely right about that prog feel. The first couple albums kind of has gone that way, and that's what I think were trying to that's what they were doing when they started out. They were trying to gear towards that, but they just didn't catch on. If you notice the 3-year break from this album until Crime of the Century, which was their next release, I think they were on the verge of breaking up, from what I remember reading something about, if they didn't do anything on the next album, they were going to finish and be done. But luckily, Crime of the Century did very well for them. And, and it took off from there, thankfully.
Yeah, the guy that wrote the lyrics for the first record, he was he was a lyricist for King Crimson. So I mean, there's that prog connection as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I couldn't even give you a track that I like off of Indelibly Stamped better than another. They just all sound like in the same mode for me. Nothing stood out that I could even say, all right, well, this one's a little bit better than. I just couldn't even pick. I don't know. I just couldn't find one. But that's the only Supertramp album in the catalog that would happen with. So let's find out what everybody else is going to have for their next album here.
Okay, my number 6 album is their debut album, self-titled Supertramp, released in August of 1970. It did not chart here, so it didn't certify at all. And it's very different to their classic sound. It sounds like the early noodlings of King Crimson, Traffic once again, very prog, a little ethereal. The thing I like about this record is Roger Hodgson sings the bulk of the songs. There are some Supertramp hallmarks you could hear when Hodgson is playing his acoustic guitar and singing a little high, but like Tom said, his voice does sound a little different on the early records. And the songs I like here are Surely, which opens the album, and then even better is the Surely reprise at the end of the album, which is, I think the opening track is 35 seconds, and then the reprise is a little over 3 minutes. Very good instrumental. And there's an epic song called Try Again, and it just stops, and then there's a breakdown. It reminds me of King Crimson from their debut album. Moonchild, that's the song it reminds me of. And then there's another good song I like called It's a Long Road. So those are my favorites, all Roger Hodgson songs from songs that he sang from the second album, the debut album, Supertramp, that comes in at number 6.
All right, I'm going to just go now, Tom, instead of him, because I'm going to mention the same album. It'd be dumb to try to go to your pick, which we know is not that one, and then go back to me. So I'm just going to piggyback off him. Mine is also the debut at number 6. Surely, isn't that a weird thing? The first part is only 31 seconds, and the reprise is actually like longer than the initial song. I've never seen that. Usually the reprise
It's unusual.
is usually like a snippet of the main song, performed later on in the album or so. It's just weird how
Styx kind of did that, didn't they, with Paradise Theater?
no, well, I don't know, they had the little AD in it, you know, and that's a little different because those were more like those were more like connecting pieces that ran into the songs. This is a little different the way Shirley opens for 31 seconds, like Davey mentioned, and then it ends up closing the album out a lot longer at 3 minutes. And obviously, the weird thing is the reprise is actually the better of the two because there's more of a song substance to it, so you can get more out of it. You can sink your teeth into it more, obviously. And then the only thing I want to mention about this one that Davey didn't touch on was for me, besides Shirley, the other song that I felt was good was "It's a Long Road." You know, other than that, the rest of it, take it or leave it. Similar to the second album in the manner that nothing else for me really stood out. There were a couple songs where like Hodgson and Davies sang co-lead vocals kind of on a couple "Nothing to Show," Shadow song, and also Richard Palmer had a little bit of hand in some of the vocals as him and Hodgson sang a couple songs together there, so that was kind of interesting. But other than that, that's why number 6 is the debut. And what do you got for your 6, Tom?
I bet you can guess.
The first one that we mentioned.
Yeah, indelibly stamped. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't really have a lot to add to that one. I kind of like the opening track. And that's a Davies song. I wanted to say Ray Davies. You got me all messed up, Joey. Rick Davies. And that's kind of a bluesy track. I think he's sort of, you know, I don't know. It's the sum of the parts. You know, they always say that you can kind of tell the musical DNA once the band's split. You can sort of tell where, you know, Rick's contribution is as opposed to Roger's, and see where they can sometimes be incompatible in terms of their co-writing. But I don't know. Yeah, as I said, this wasn't an album that. It's the same with the first album. You like you said, there's nothing that stands out. And one of the things that I kind of use to judge records is if anything, even if it's just one song, ever winds up on their set list when they're at their peak. You know what I mean? Like if you're 5 albums in and you're performing a live show, if you've already dropped everything from your first 2 records, then clearly you just don't, you know, it's just not material that has won the fans over or whatever. And these, I mean, like, I don't think any of these things really, I don't know if they wound up on any compilations or any of that kind of stuff, but those first 2 records were definitely kind of outliers because, man, they get, like, we're going to get into the next 5. And I mean, there are some solid selections in that group. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is if you mix up Ray Davies and and this Davies, you're crazy.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm not saying it to that musically they're compatible. I'm just saying it from a name standpoint, you know. Yeah, I know a kid named Bram Davies. I mean, but he's not a musician. That's, you know.
There's not too many great songwriters like Ray Davies, though.
And we are fortunate to have an actual Davey with us today. Just singular, though, right, Davey?
Thank you.
But he's not from Davie. He's not from Davie, Florida, either. So,
yeah,
New York over here.
Davey Davies.
Okay.
All right, who's up?
Dave's up because we're going to our top 5 already.
Ooh.
Okay, coming in at number 5 for me, from 1975, their 4th album, Crisis, What Crisis. It reached number 44 on the Billboard charts, but did not certify. And the cover is very Monty Python-esque, I always thought. And the guy on the cover of Crisis, What Crisis reminds me of John Cleese, just sitting there with the giant factories in the back and Crisis, What Crisis? And the whole world is going to heck behind him, let's say. This album is my least favorite with the classic lineup. I think it was a little bit rushed after Crime of the Century because it came out a year later, and I don't think their ideas had enough time to germinate. And I don't feel the songs are as memorable as the album before and the album after. My favorites are Sister Moonshine, the Roger Hodgson song, that second song on the record, and then the first Rick Davies song on the album, Ain't Nobody But Me. So that's my number 5 from 1975. Album number 4, Crisis. What crisis?
What crisis? Well, we're gonna have some deviation on that one as well. But anyhow, mine is Famous Last Words. And
I
this
knew
is
it.
the 1982 record. It spawned the hit It's Raining Again. And I think at this point, the problem that Supertramp was facing was, they just come off a record that was just so iconic. Breakfast in America. I mean, what do you do? In fact, Joey and I have had this conversation before, Davey, and you can chime in your thoughts on it, but it seems like every band has like that album, and then they have to follow it up, and it's never easy. I think about like REO Speedwagon trying to follow up High Infidelity, and Joey's he's a big fan of Good Trouble, but again, Rush, when they had Moving Pictures and they followed it up with what was it? That was Subdivisions. Signals, sorry, with the song Subdivisions on it. But so there's different ways you can go. You can either try to be formulaic and kind of stick with it and not veer too far from what worked in the previous record. I don't think Supertramp erred in that respect. I just don't think the songs were as strong as anything that they've done with the classic lineup or even the production. I think the production on it sounds a little bit too 80s. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the biggest example of that would be Yes, following up 90125 with Big Generator.
Yeah. And that took them 5 years.
Yeah.
Of course, they did follow up Fragile with Close to the Edge. Who does that?
Very few bands.
I mean, that was, woo. Yeah, who does that?
All right. So my number 5 is Crisis. What crisis?
Wow.
Yeah,
Guys are killing me.
that album
We match.
is just not and I have friends who love this album, but for some reason I just cannot get into it. But unlike the first 2 albums, there's definitely some better material here, and I can tell you Easy Does It is a great opener. Sister Moonshine, another deep classic cut. You don't hear it every day on the radio or anything like that, but it's definitely a good song. The Meaning, The Two of Us, so it's got some really good tracks in there. It's basically the first 2 and the last 2 for me, and then everything else in between for me was just nothing to really write home about. So Crisis with Crisis also, after the success of Crime of the Century, they were rushed back in the studio, and that was one of the problems. The record company rushed them in, and I guess they just had no vision for a completed album, kind of like Indelibly Stamped. That was another problem with that album. So, the record company wanted them to make the album, get back out on the road, and they just they really just didn't have what it took. They had more time to work on Crime of the Century, but it's a good thing they did, because that's the one that really put them on the map. So following it up with this was a letdown, and like Davey said, it didn't even chart. So usually most bands from the classic era of the 70s and 80s, once you come out with a hit album, usually, unless the album's really, really bad, usually you're still going to certify, usually. More likely than not. Most bands do. And these guys, for some reason, this album just didn't do it. A lot of people just never got into it. I think another thing, the reason why that happened was because there's not really a clear cut single on here like there was on all the rest of the remaining albums that we're going to discuss here. So that was big. They just didn't have that one hit single that perhaps would have definitely, say for instance, if Give a Little Bit was on this album, by all means, you probably would have had maybe even a platinum album. You know what I'm saying? Because at the time, you had to have some kind of airplay, some kind of a single to help manifest the sales. And you know, this one just didn't have it. So but nonetheless, it's not a bad album. It's just not as good as the remaining four that you'll see on my list. That's all.
I agree. It did chart at number 44. It just didn't certify in America. That album that you just mentioned.
Right.
Crisis, What Crisis. Okay, moving on to number 4, my number 4 album. And I hated putting this at number 4 because I think it's an excellent album. Even in the Quietest Moments from 1977. And this was their big breakthrough in America. It charted at number 16 and it did certify gold. And this is the one with the big famous hit, Give a Little Bit, that everyone knows, that your boys from Buffalo up there covered, the Goo Goo Dolls.
That's
Had a
true.
big hit with it. Yep. Roger Hodgson sort of dominates the songs here a little. He's got 4 out of the 7 songs, including the almost 11-minute epic Fool's Overture, which is one of my favorite Supertramp songs. That's a real prog song. Great orchestration, the melody, just the way everything comes together. Excellent song, Fool's Overture. Another one I like, a deep cut, is Babahi, another Roger Hodgson song. And then from Rick Davies, I think From Now On is probably definitely his best song on this album. So at number 4, Even in the Quietest Moments.
All right. Let's see what Mr. Jennings has. Sir Jennings.
I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna be quiet with this one. Just even in the quietest moments. Yeah, check it out. I actually got I've got the next one. It's all on vinyl and multiple copies. So this is notice you know, before we got on the air, Davey asked if it was snowing here in Western New York, and look on the cover of the album, you know. But now if you own this record, you'll notice that it was a regular, right? But check out this second copy I have. Okay. Gatefold. Nice. You don't see this very often. This is this was one of those super high fidelity masters audiophile copies, but yeah, this is a great record. You mentioned you hit on the tunes that I love. Give a Little Bit, of course, just a classic. If you play guitar, it's a great little song to play on guitar as well as I do. Man, Fool's Overture. Yeah. In fact, the version on Paris is superior to this one, but just an incredible song. And again, a lot of this stuff shows up on Paris as well. But, you know, it's weird. You know, I agree with you when you said, oh, I hate to put this in 4th, you know, because really it's a solid record. And sonically, it's a great sounding record, too. I think in some ways I don't know that it sounds better produced than Breakfast in America or Crime of the Century, but yeah, pretty close. You know, it really, to me, it's an album where Supertramp kind of more became what they were going to be on Breakfast in America than, you know, Crime of the Century was kind of, I don't know, sort of their peak creative point, so to speak. But we'll get to that one at some other point. Anyhow, I veered in 27 different directions and I wasn't even quiet in any of them. Hopefully some of that made sense. Okay.
Well, my number 4 is surprising here because this is was for me. I've really just started to enjoy this album. I'm just getting the fullest potential out of it, and that's going to be the 1982 Famous Last Words. Man, what a way to go out! You know, obviously the title says it all because they knew that it was the end. You know, with Roger and Davies always not getting along too well there. And, you know, this album, though, is only their second top 10 album. It did reach number 5. It did go gold. It's Raining Again, peaked at number 11. What a great song. There was nothing like seeing that one performed at Art Park when Roger came solo. That was, what a way to end the show with that song. It was just one of those moments where you really had to be there to actually enjoy the full atmosphere of the whole song being played. My Kind of Lady was also a single, reached number 31. But to me, the super lost gem on this album that I just discovered myself recently was Don't Leave Me Now. wow, what a great song that closes out the album. I don't know if it's any like last message to Davies. Don't leave me now with
That's
Roger going
exactly
out
what
the
I was
door.
thinking.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but I'll tell you what a great song that closed the chapter on the Hodgson area on this Supertramp album. And then I'm looking at the rest of the album. Crazy opens it up. Not bad. Bonnie, Know Who You Are, My Kind of Lady. I mean, there's really only two real throwaways on here, in my opinion, and one of them is "Put on Your Old Brown Shoes," which a lot of people, for some reason, really like that one. But for me, it just didn't really do anything for me. But the rest of the album, I definitely give it a great thumbs up there, and it definitely is a solid, very solid album in my book.
So did you know Cannonball was written for this? And I think
Yeah,
they recorded it,
No.
for this record, and then they held it out for the next album because I think it was too long, or maybe one of them vetoed it. But yeah, so that came out of the same sessions, which is the strongest post Hodgson cut, in my opinion.
Definitely.
yeah, I'll disagree with that one, but it definitely did commercial wise. It definitely helped out their next album big time. Even though it's a long song, I think it's like clocking in at 7 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a long one, real long for a band that was putting out classic singles that were only about 4.5 minutes. Now you pull off this 7 minute doozy there with Cannonball. So
Yeah, supposedly when Hodgson left, there was an agreement that Supertramp would not perform any Roger Hodgson songs live
yeah,
after he left, and then eventually they did, I guess.
They did. I saw them
Yeah.
do Hodgson songs after he had
Yeah.
left the band.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of they were attempting to get they were attempting to get back together, but that was, I guess Hodgson was just, apoplectic. I love that word.
yeah,
They
that
tried a
that
few times. It didn't work.
yeah, they never got it in writing, so obviously Davies went against their word of each other. It was an agreement they had, just a spoken agreement. And obviously Roger, he followed up on it. He doesn't bother with any of those songs from that era.
Well, I mean, I
He
don't
didn't
know.
have to though.
I feel like if you co-write it or if you perform on it, you got the right to perform it live. I mean, bar bands perform
Yeah.
songs they never recorded. People are paying to see Supertramp. They expect to see Supertramp songs. But by the same token, obviously Roger is a sensitive guy. He's very like close to his material and probably just wanted to see it presented in a way that he wanted to present it. But oh well. It is what it is. Shame these guys couldn't have gotten it back together for at least one more show. Like Joey said, seeing Roger Hodgson solo doing the Supertramp stuff was pretty amazing. But I can only imagine. I mean, just based on the Paris recording alone, I would have loved to see the classic lineup live. They must have been
Yeah.
incredible.
All right, where are we at now?
Number 3.
Wow. What do you got?
My number 3 album you just mentioned from 1982, Famous Last Words. And I've always loved this album. I think I like it more than a lot of Supertramp fans. And there was no way they could duplicate the juggernaut success of the previous album, Breakfast in America. It was just so massive, so big that almost anything they put out after this wouldn't do as well. So this only made it to gold. But like you said, it did hit number 5. And once again, Hodgson has 5 songs and Davies has 4 songs on the record. So the 5th song was probably going to be Cannonball. So I'm guessing that Hodgson nixed that song from the album. And I think there's some really good songs here. Say La Bon, you didn't mention, which has backing vocals from Ann and Nancy Wilson. I love that song, Hodgson song. And also Waiting So Long, which is a Rick Davies song. But I think that Roger Hodgson's guitar solo at the end of that is spectacular. And he goes off on the electric guitar. So those last 2 songs, Waiting So Long, and then the one you mentioned, end the album very well. So I really enjoy this album. Famous Last Words, my number 3.
All right, Thom, take her away.
Me. Take it away. Oh, sorry, that's Paul McCartney. Well, I got to find my copy of this record.
Uh-oh.
Look at that.
What's he digging up?
Or you could say "Take Me Away" by Blue Oyster Cult.
Oh, you like the Blue Oyster Cult?
Oh
yeah, this is another high fidelity copy of this baby. And Crime of the Century. That's my number 3. I mean, this is the record that where Supertramp became Supertramp. And even
Yes.
on the even on the Paris, I refer to the Paris record. That's my favorite Supertramp record is Paris, but we're not doing live albums in this. But man, just I even like the cover art. I think the cover art is, one of the things is like you said, Crisis What Crisis, I don't know, and indelibly stamped. And even the first record, I mean, some of their cover art is not great. But yeah, this is a nice little package. So many great songs. I mean, where do we begin? You're right. You bloody well right. To me, I think that's Rick Davies' finest hour and one of his finest hours in Supertramp. He had a lot of great songs. Hide in Your Shell, Asylum. I mean, almost all these School. I'm a school teacher, and of course that opens up the Paris record as well. I do think the only reason I have it is at number 3 is because I just think that the live versions of the bulk of these songs are a little bit better than the studio versions, and obviously the studio versions are really good. So that's what I got.
That's what he has. All right. Well, my number 3, taking the bronze here, none other than Even in the Quietest Moments, 1977. Band's 5th album. And with this album, I would say, what an album. That's the first thing I'm going to say about it. What an album. That's why it's at number 3 here. Made number 16. I think the main thing what I like about it is it only has 7 songs on it on this album. Seems like whenever you have only 7 songs on an album or 6, the least amount of songs you have on an album, sometimes if the songs aren't good, that's gonna kind of ruin it, because usually that means the songs are kind of a little bit on the longer side. But in this case, you kick it off with Give a Little Bit, like Davey mentioned, great song. Even in the Quietest Moments, for me, is the main highlight on this album. I know a lot of people like Fool's Overture. It's good. I just think Fool's Overture to me is just a little long and in the tooth for me, a little too long. If they would have shortened it up a little bit, maybe I would have liked it more. But I do like it, but not as much as you
Ouch.
guys.
That's all I got to say.
Not as much as
ouch.
you guys. I know that.
You get an official ouch.
How did you pronounce that one song, Davey? Babaji?
Babaji. I
Babaji.
think it is.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's a very great, that's a great song. I really enjoy that one. Downstream was another highlight for me. That was one of the better songs on the album. But yeah, this album, I love the cover. One thing I was going to say about this one here was the fact that Give a Little Bit. If it wasn't for that song, it probably wouldn't have sold as much. But like we were mentioning with the other one there, if you have a hit single, it's going to help the sales here. Just because even in the Quiet Moments and Fool's Overture are so long, obviously they wouldn't have been, reaching any album charts as singles. So that's just the nature of the beach. But luckily they for AOR, they had a lot of airplay on this one with those the 3 songs all together, which helped get this album rolling here. And like Davey said, like yeah, you got once again you got 4 Hodgson 4 Hodgson songs and 3 Davey songs. And like normal, the Davey songs are the weaker ones on the album. I disagree when you say Rick Davies has a lot of great songs. He's got some good songs, but I feel he doesn't have a lot. You know, if it wasn't for Roger Hodgson, there's no way Supertramp would have ever gotten as big as they were. Um, Roger
No,
Hodgson,
I agree with that, but he
Yes.
definitely, you know, he doesn't have a strong voice for sure, but if he sings material that's suited for his voice, he's very good. Yeah. I mean, Bloody
I
Well
mean,
Right is a classic. I mean, you can't
that one
take that
is.
away
That's
from him.
probably my
Yeah.
favorite song by Rick.
Yeah.
But getting back, but the one thing you can say about Rick Davies is that he's a great keyboardist. Yes, no, Tom? You're
I
He
don't
looking.
know.
is.
You know, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know because both Hodgson and Davies play keyboards, right?
Yeah. Well,
I
Well,
don't know that I can.
Davies.
I don't know. I can discern. You know who's playing what. I mean, the keyboard work on Supertramp albums is great, but I don't. I don't know that it's.
Well,
I
it's
don't know.
basically Rick Davies playing the piano more,
Yeah.
and Hodgson doing a lot of the electric keyboards.
So like clavinet stuff like that. You know. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you know. I don't know. I don't. I don't. I don't know. He's sure he's good. but it's you know, to me, Supertramp. When I think Supertramp, again, I think that's the problem is that you know, have you ever heard Hodgson solo records, which some of those are excellent, but you could tell where he needs a Davies. You know what I mean? Like there's you get these bands that really just it's the two guys, and when they work together, they make magic.
yeah.
You know, I don't know that Hodgson is a prolific, you know, instrumentalist or whatever, but you know, he's a great vocalist, you know, and obviously whether they wrote songs together or not, there was that competition to, and that's well documented that they were both kind of at each other in terms of the direction that they wanted the band to go. So
And
I
they're
don't know.
both very different people.
Yeah, I guess they were like
Because
polar opposites from what I
yes,
read.
because Davies was very working class, and
Yeah.
Roger Hodgson was a bit more posh. He was very spiritual, very into his family, religion, nature, and polar opposite from Davies.
Yeah. Yeah. I met Roger. I had an opportunity to meet him. It was fun, a funny story because he was supposed, did you meet him when he was at our park, Joey?
No, I didn't get the chance.
Yeah, there was supposed to be some kind of meet and greet for the press, and they totally forgot about me. And I got really mad. I wrote a scathing email to the publicist that I missed my deadline because I waited an hour and a half, and then they told me the bus took off. So the next time he was in town, they made good on it. They gave me my wife and I a personal meet and greet backstage at a theater in Rochester called the Eastman Theater, and he was just a really sweet guy. We chatted about a lot of stuff. Like he had written a song with Phil Collins and did some work for. He wrote some stuff with Trevor Rabin for one of the Yes albums, and yeah, he
Yeah,
actually
the
I
Talk
guess
album.
yeah, and I guess he was considered as a lead singer for Yes at one point. But yeah, I could see. I mean, he's definitely, you know, like in that kind of John Anderson mold, very, like you said, very spiritual, very, I mean, even his solo work is some of the stuff that he writes about is really kind of, you know, I don't want to use the term out there because it's not out there. I mean, everybody has their beliefs and I respect people that have strong beliefs, but I mean, just some pretty wild concepts in regard to nature and things like that. Whereas I said, Davies, even musically, you could see that he was a very straight ahead kind of bar band rock kind of guy. Like he had a little more of that sensibility,
Precisely.
you know?
Yes.
All right, I guess we're going down with our top two now.
Yeah.
Okay. This was very hard for me because as a big prog rock aficionado, my head tells me Crime of the Century is their best album, but my heart tells me Breakfast in America is their best album. So I was torn which way to go, and I thought about this a lot, and I decided my number two would be their third album from 1974, the aforementioned Crime of the Century. It peaked at number 38 on the Billboard charts, and it went gold. And this was their first album with a classic lineup. I want to give some love to the other guys besides Davies and Hodgson that we keep mentioning. On bass, Doogie Thompson. On drums, Bob Siebenberg, who was sometimes referred to on the records, which confused me when I was a kid. Sometimes it said Bob, the letter C is his middle initial, period, Benberg, instead of the way his name is actually spelled, Siebenberg. But he was the drummer, and they made a very good rhythm section, very underrated. The way they underpin all the Davies and Hodgson songs is really good. And then we got to give it up for the master of ceremonies for all the live shows on woodwinds, sax, flutes, keyboards, backing vocals, Mr. John Hellowell. And he made a great MC on all the live shows. He would speak to the crowd rather than Davies and Hodgson. They'd rather be in the background, just playing the music. So Crime of the Century is my number 2. And it's probably the most respected album by all the prog fans out there of Supertramp. But the heart wants what the heart wants. So this is my number 2 album. And I would say my favorite songs, the Hodgson song, Hide in Your Shell. Great song. I love the lyrics. I love the little, I don't even know what it is. There's an odd keyboard sound in the background. Almost sounds like a theremin. And if you listen in headphones, you could hear it. It's a great addition to the song. Another great song, If Everyone Was Listening, the next to last song. And then the last song, the Rick Davies penned Crime of the Century, title track, all excellent songs. But as you said, Tom, there's really not a bad song on this record. Yeah. And the audio quality of the album is great. And a lot of people used to use this album to test stereos back in the day when vinyl was the big format. So number 2, Crime of the Century.
Yeah, you touched on some great stuff there with that too. I know Asia
Thanks.
was another one. Steely Dan, same thing in terms of like sound guys would throw this record on and set their EQs to it and everything. That was for Crime of the Century. And I think it was Rick's finest hour. And like you mentioned, there's other band members. I'm glad you mentioned Hellowell, especially because man, he was. I guess Davies and Hodgson hate each other so much that they performed on opposite sides of the stage. And then Hellowell wound up having to be the visual component, the guy that was kind of moving around and directing traffic and stuff, the cheerleader. But yeah, man, that musical tension is incredible. But anyhow, I did the exact same thing you did. I said to myself, damn it, I just can't go Breakfast in America. It's too obvious. And then, you listen to it again and you go, oh my God, this record's so damn good. Like, how do you put this at number 2? Like it almost seems sacrilege. So my number 2 is the aforementioned Crisis. What Crisis?
Wow.
Now, I will acknowledge both a lot of the things that you gentlemen said. First of all, the cover, very cool. It's kind of like the place has been bombed out and there's the Monty Python-esque thing, kind of similar to, I guess, Farewell to Kings, but by Rush, but they had a dummy in a busted building in the background, which by the way, Davey, the cover of Farewell to Kings, even though it has some structures in the background from Toronto, was actually photographed in Buffalo, New York. There's your Rush trivia for the day.
I did not know.
It's like, I don't know, this album is, to me, it's a bunch of leftovers from the Crime of the Century sessions. I guess I think I remember, I might be wrong, and if you're better at the trivia stuff than I am on this, Davey, I think I remember maybe Roger was sick and had to go off the road, so that's why they were doing an album. But I think what you said may be more correct, where the label was like, oh yeah, you got to hit record, so let's get something else out. Whatever the case, there's just, to me, even though it doesn't necessarily have the standout hits of some of the other, or even the iconic classics of some of the previous records, it's just, to me, it's just a very interesting record. It's just interesting. I popped it on the turntable. There's a lot of really cool stereo effects, just some great mixing. I don't know. I just find this kind of a fun sort of sit back and absorb it, listen, and it's not a record that I was particularly overwhelmed with before we did the ranking. In fact, I probably, if I had just given a cursory listen, I would put it around where you guys were. But I think, like Joey said, you were listening to Famous Last Words, and you're like, oh my God, this album is really cool. Well, that was my experience with this record. So yeah, I just have had a new appreciation for it. I don't know. I really enjoyed it. And I was like, it was a part of me that was going to put it as my favorite just because it's the one I've enjoyed the most revisiting during the whole ranking phase. But I don't know. Breakfast in America is just too damn good.
And that's the great thing about doing these, is that you discover something almost
Yeah.
kind of fresh, kind of new,
Sure.
even if it's been out for 40 years.
Right.
You know, because there were so many other albums that you had paid more attention to. And then you go back and that's I'm kind of glad why music is kind of faded now. I'm not a big fan on today's music, and I'm glad because that saves me from having to buy, and I can go back and dig deeper into catalogs like this band and
Yeah.
other bands, and you like you said, Tom, you appreciate an album a lot more than you ever even realized, and it just it opens up new doors.
Well,
So-
yeah. We've talked about it. And Davey, you can chime in on this topic too, because Joey and I have discussed it. You know, sometimes a favorite record is the one that came out when you were a certain age. You know, maybe you're a freshman in high school. That's your favorite year of music. So or it's the first album that you heard by the band, or it just found you at a time where you were, you know, more or less receptive to it. And sometimes it comes at a time when you're not receptive to it. And then you go back to it and go, geez, you know, I wish I'd listened to this a little bit closer when it first came out, or maybe when I first listened to it. And again, I don't know, this was a record that I just hadn't spent a lot of time with. And I put it on my turntable. I was just kind of chilling after a long day of work. I was like, damn, like this is fun, you know, as opposed to some of the other ones I might listen to in the car, which I didn't necessarily get into the record as well. And I find sometimes I'll put a record on in my car and then I'll be like, oh, I got to listen to this on my home stereo because this is really good. You know what I mean? I don't know if that you guys ever had that experience, but
Oh yeah.
I have.
Yeah, because you get a better, closer listen, you know, and you know, if you go ahead and listen to it once you get home, you know, and if it catches your attention in the car, you know, then it's definitely gonna, you know, catch your attention
Yeah,
at home.
if it's strong enough to catch you on some
Yep.
crappy stereo system, you know, you got to figure maybe, you know, there's certain I don't know, there's certain things like Yes, for example. I mean, man, I don't know. I could listen to Yes in my car. I can listen to it on stereo. I just, you know, there's some Yes albums that I just absolutely love, but I always prefer it on the stereo. I think this record was one of the ones which I probably heard it in my car or whatever, but then when I put the actual vinyl on, because I was trying to cram in, you know, being able to listen to all the records, I got it and I was like, damn, this has got some crazy shit going on in it. This is a fun listen, you know?
All right, so
It
my
depends
number.
when you come into a catalog sometimes.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's probably people that there's got to be somebody out there who thinks that the first album is the only good because it's such an outlier. You know, maybe somebody says, "Oh, first Supertramp album is the only good one," and they're not wrong. I mean, if that's how they feel and that's the kind of music that they prefer, but you know, again, that's not an album that caught me, and I think it again. It sounds so dated that's not a period of music that I listened to a lot of music from anyway. I don't think. Well, maybe I do, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. All right, let's get my number 2 in, and then we can talk about our number 1s. Number 2, 1974, Crime of the Century.
Oh, look at that.
Same as Davey. Yep. First gold record in the U.S. Favorite song off the album, Hide in Your Shell, which is probably my second favorite Supertramp song of all time. You know, and then like Tom mentioned earlier, Bloody Well Right, which in my opinion is the best Davey song with vocals. School, that's a classic that Roger still plays to this day when he was touring. Dreamer, Crime of the Century. If Everybody Was Listening, that was another standout that I really just found a new appreciation for recently. So, I mean, this album definitely, you know, no doubt about it, second favorite Supertramp album, and was the album that put him on the map. You know, in the UK, it reached number 4, number 38 here, and it got the whole ball really, really going with them, you know, and then they followed up with Crisis with Crisis, which probably set them back a little bit in reality, you know, because it didn't sell nowhere near as much. But then they rebounded nicely from there on out until Roger left. So I guess we got ourselves a rarity here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hear your take on that number 1 album there.
My number one album and everyone's number one album, Breakfast in America from March of 1979. And this was the album where they just hit the zeitgeist, and their songs were all over AM and FM radio. So they had the big pop hits, which I'm not going to mention because I'll let you guys talk about that. And I'm going to talk about the deeper cuts on the album that I love. First of all, the opening track, Gone Hollywood, is a great song with some excellent guitar work from Roger Hodgson. And I like the way they go back and forth on the vocals between Davies and Hodgson, which is something they didn't do all that often. And I think that adds a lot to this song, and it's a very upbeat, rocking song. So Gone Hollywood, my first favorite song from the record. The Hodgson ballad, Lord, Is It Mine? The very underrated song, and once again brings up his spiritual side. And then the epic closer, of course, Child of Vision, the big prog number on the album, over 7 minutes long, with the great keyboards in it, the dueling keyboards between Davies on the piano and Hodgson on the electric piano. Excellent way to end the record. So number one, Breakfast in America, which I should say peaked at number one, their only number one album. And in America, it went 4 times platinum. And the last thing I want to say about Supertramp is that they always had big success in Canada and France. Hence, that's why they recorded their live album in Paris, France. The follow-up, to Breakfast in America, the double live album that Thom loves so much. So they were a big band in French-speaking countries.
Yeah,
So
Paris.
that's it, number one.
Paris was from that tour, which is definitely one of the great all-time live albums for sure.
Yeah. Well, look at, so this one, same thing. I got, this is the standard version, sleeves, all that. And I got this baby. High fidelity.
Gatefold.
Gatefold.
Yeah.
Look at that. Make sure you put that in the show
Wait,
notes.
show
So
it
people
again,
want to
show
see
it
the
again.
gate.
It wasn't on
gatefold.
camera.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
open it again.
The other interesting thing about this is, I don't know if you know the little oddity of it, but if you put this section in the mirror, it shows 9/11. Okay, and then it's right above the World Trade Center.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know. There's nothing I could say about the record that you guys aren't going to say. It's just a great record. I didn't want it to be number one, but it is. Anybody else? I don't know. I just don't know how you can put this at number two.
And if you look at the albums closely there, those aren't actual buildings and things. That's
Yeah, it's just
a lot of people don't realize either, because you're looking at it from far away. It looks like it's the actual buildings, but when you zoom in on it, it's actually things that you would find in a diner.
Yeah, it's a little model in New York City built out of stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's chess pieces and stuff. So yeah. Salt shakers.
Straw things. Yep.
It did win a Grammy for best packaging, best album packaging.
I wonder who that lady is, who the waitress is.
It's Flo. Look at her name tag, Thom.
It's not the Flo, though. No, the Flo was a little thin.
It actually depicts Kate Murtaugh dressed as a waitress named Libby, it says.
Oh, it's Libby. Okay.
Libby.
I thought it was Flo. I got Alice on my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, back to Crisis Were Crisis and indelibly stamped. I mean, I wonder if those records would have done better with better cover art. I mean, I like that cover art, but it's just a little odd, This is what's interesting is that this album cover is when you get down to it, it's very artsy. It's but it's also very, like, I don't know, it's aesthetically very pleasing. Famous Last Words, that's got to be their most kind of, at least of the Hodgson era, just their most kind of, simple album cover without a lot going on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
All right. So my Breakfast in America reasoning here was 3 singles cracked the top 40. Logical Song made it all the way up to number 6. Interesting note also, and this is something I was going to mention on Even in the Quietest Moments, but I kind of forgot. Even in the Quietest Moments was the first album that Peter Henderson would engineer, and then he ended up obviously producing the Supertramp albums down the road. So he produced Breakfast in America, and then he also went on to produce many famous albums, including one from Rush. Do you remember the one from Rush that he
That
produced?
Henderson did.
Peter
Oh,
Henderson. Yep.
Caress of Steel.
Nope.
no, later 80s. I think
Yep.
Power Windows.
Nah. Nope.
Grace Under Pressure.
There you go. Grace Under Pressure. So yeah, Henderson went on to some more. Did a lot of high profile work there. Grace Under Pressure being one of my favorite Rush albums of all time for sure. This album also has a couple sleepers. I feel like "Oh Darling" is the sleeper on the album. I really enjoy that song, and that one's one that never got no airplay. But it also includes my all-time favorite Supertramp song. Any ideas what I might be talking about here?
Your
Take the
favorite?
Long Way Home.
You got it, man. That's the
That's a
song
great song.
I got to play on 97 Rock when I was a guest DJ. So that was
Wait,
great.
which song?
Take the
Take
long,
the long
way
way
home.
home.
Okay, I got it.
Did you in fact do that after you left the studio? Did you take the long way home?
Well, it was bad weather, so I think I did.
Yeah.
I had to go down there at 97 Rock on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I was on air from 10 to noon. It was a contest. You just submitted your list of 30 songs, and then if they called you, that you got picked. And sure enough, I got picked to do it. And
Nice.
if they didn't pick the songs that say if they didn't match up, and there was one song that you wanted to add in there, or you could swap one out. And the program the guy I was with, did that for me. But the only mistake he made was he forgot that this song takes a while in the beginning, so he didn't like cue it in better. So it takes a while for it to kick in, but you get the full blast of the song at least.
So you think you're Romeo?
Yep. But that was awesome.
Yeah, great song.
Yep, because at that time, Hodgson was actually coming to Buffalo to play the trail. So I actually, just on my own, because you could say what you want. You're the guest DJ, so I actually plugged that show for him without anybody telling me I had to or anything like that. I just mentioned, and for you Supertramp Roger Hodgson fans, Hodgson will be playing the 12th on whenever it was. That was pretty cool.
Did you see him at the 12th?
Oh yeah.
No, I didn't, man. That must have been amazing.
It was him and his son, basically. He was just like the two of them up on stage.
Oh, so it wasn't like the full band.
No.
Yeah, I like the full band at our park. I thought that was cool.
Oh.
I saw him twice. I saw him in Rochester too with the full band.
Yeah, the last time he came here was he played the Seneca Niagara Casino. That was a great show too.
Yeah.
So Breakfast in America, like Davey said, it's all our three favorites. It's rare when we all agree on a number one. So this was and I don't think any of us picked this album just because of all the singles. And I mean, it's just a great album from beginning to end. I mean, you cannot deny it, like Thom said when he was mentioning it, and Davey too, both you guys. It's just a great album from beginning to end. Thom put it on and goes, how can I not like this one? But it just, the music speaks for itself.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. All right, so let's do what we should have done this from the beginning, and I kind of forgot. But Davey, give me the first Supertramp album that you ever owned.
Breakfast in America. I remember my father worked in Manhattan, downtown on Wall Street, and I had him buy it for me and bring it home for me because it was way before I drove. So definitely Breakfast in America.
Thom?
Paris.
Yeah. Okay. That was your first.
Oh,
What
100%.
about you?
Yeah.
Probably a greatest hits CD. I don't think I ever. Oh, no, let me think now. Trying to think now, because my brother had. So I always was able to listen to it because my brother had it on cassette. So I always heard that first. I'm not sure. I think it was a greatest hits CD. I ended up getting in the early '90s. Was the first one I actually owned on my own. No, you know what? I take that back because I remember I had Supertramp Paris, I believe, on cassette. Now that I'm thinking back on it, but the problem was, you know how like back in the day, some of those cassettes, depending on what company it was, would start squeaking and making noises. And yeah, so that's why I never even got that much play out of it. I think I got it through Columbia House Music.
Oh,
You remember how you bought the 12 CDs
yeah.
for a penny or whatever? And yeah, that was one of the
Right.
choices. There you go. So
Dude,
that
was the worst when a cassette broke, because you,
oh yeah.
especially like an industrial one, you're just like, oh man, you spent like $4 on it and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna be broke. Yeah. And then you take it out and you try to take a piece of tape and put it together, and then you miss that little snippet of the song. Did you guys ever experience, you guys both had records, right? Did you ever have a
Yes.
song that like you had the record and the song skipped at a particular point, and you got
Oh,
so used to it that
definitely.
when it came on the radio, you'd be like listening for the skip?
I would add the skip. Yes.
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, what version is this? Where's the skip?
My Bruce Springsteen Born to Run in Jungle Land, it skipped twice.
Yeah.
Well, you heard as the record was going.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, I remember used to having to weight down my needle by putting pennies on taped to it.
Oh, I remember that.
I did
yeah.
that too.
Yeah, we did that. The good old days.
Tricks of the trade.
Let us reminisce, old men. we should be sitting on a park bench.
But yeah, so Supertramp, just to finish up my take on the band, I went back and actually did the whole catalog, because I think there was only another 4 albums on there that that were just needed to be done. So I added those in there. So where everything fell for me, obviously the Hodgson albums were still in the same exact order, but the only difference was Free as a Bird ended up being the worst of the lot, because that would have made it number 11. Indelibly Stamped, which was my number 7 from the Hodgson, became number 10. And then it pretty much, Some Things Never Change. Brother, Where You're Bound, the first one without Roger, was number 8. The debut, number 7, Supertramp. And then the highest ranking of the Davies-led Supertramp was actually Slow Motion for me. And then from there, it just went up with my final 5 that we just talked about. So I just figure I'd throw that in there in case if anybody wanted to ask about it, since there was only a few more albums to go and I was ahead of you guys on ranking them. So I had a little time to kill.